Hey everybody, welcome to your deep dive. This one's going to be fun. We're going to turn up the volume on team productivity and see what software teams can learn from. Legendary rock bands, we're talking the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, even the Sex Pistols, all becoming our unexpected productivity gurus. Think cranking out hit songs daily and recording entire albums in a single day, whether you're leading a team or just want to, unleash your creative potential. This is going to be a fascinating ride.
It's funny, we always celebrate these bands for their creativity, but we rarely analyze them through a productivity lens. And believe me, their output was phenomenal.
Okay, you got my attention. Multiple albums and singles every year. Back when recording technology was practically prehistoric compared to what we have now. How did they pull that off? And what can we learn from it today?
It's all about recognizing the surprising parallels between music production and software development. Songwriting is like coding. Recording sessions are like building an app. Planning a massive tour, well, that's like deploying a complex software solution. The creative energy, the need for collaboration, the constant push for improvement, it's all remarkably similar.
So are you saying we should be aiming to record our software projects in a single day, like the Beatles did with Please Please Me back in 1963? That's some serious dedication.
Well, maybe not everything needs to be done in a day, but think about what enabled that feat. Intense preparation beforehand, a crystal clear division of labor, everyone laser focused on the shared goal. These are principles any software team can implement, right?
That makes sense. It's like they had this incredible momentum going, almost like a tight deadline built into their very existence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Music journalist David Hepworth put it perfectly when he described the music scene of the 60s. He said, "In the days of satisfaction, you were only as good as your last record." They would have gone and invented another one and put that out 6 weeks later. That constant pressure and feedback loop fueled their productivity.
Wow, imagine having to constantly innovate and deliver like that. It's almost like an extreme version of agile development. But let's talk about how these bands actually function as teams. They weren't just solo artists. They had their own internal dynamics, evolutions, and probably some clashes along the way.
Absolutely. To understand their journey, we can look at Tuckman's stages of group development: forming, storming, norming, and performing. It's a roadmap for how teams go from that initial awkward getting to know you phase to a high-performing unit.
Okay, so forming is like the first day of school. Storming is when everyone realizes they have different ideas about the science project. Norming is when they finally agree on building a volcano. And performing is when they win first prize at the science fair. Did our rock star teams go through this too?
They absolutely did, though maybe with fewer volcanoes involved. Think about the Beatles. They started as a backing band, playing covers and finding their footing. It was their intense time performing in Hamburg that really pushed them through the storming and norming stages. They had to adapt, work out their differences, and forge their unique sound in the crucible of those marathon gigs.
That makes sense. And the Rolling Stones had a similar evolution, right? Bonding over their love of blues music and then developing their own style through endless gigs and experimentation.
Precisely. And here's where things get really interesting. David Hepworth talks about this concept of groupness. He argues that it's not just about having the most talented musicians. It's about the specific blend of personalities and skills that makes a team click. Like a perfectly balanced recipe, each ingredient matters.
So it's not about being a collection of superstars, but finding that synergy where strengths and weaknesses complement each other. That's a pretty powerful idea.
Exactly. Even if it means having someone who might not be the most technically brilliant musician, but fits perfectly into the group dynamic. Think about Ringo Starr. He wasn't considered a flashy drummer, but his steady, reliable style was exactly what the Beatles needed. This translates directly to software teams. Sometimes the best cultural fit will outperform the individual rock star coder.
That's so true. It's a reminder to consider not just skills, but personality and how people will work together when building any team. Okay, so we've got productivity and team formation. Now let's add a little drama and talk about leadership. Who is calling the shots in these legendary bands?
Leadership. Always essential and often complicated, especially in creative groups. We see a mix of styles at play, sometimes shared, sometimes more dominant. Take the Rolling Stones, for example. Everyone assumes Mick Jagger is the leader, right?
Yeah, he's the front man, the iconic voice, the energy. But you mentioned some band members disagree with that label, saying he's just the lead singer. So where does the real leadership lie?
It's a fascinating paradox. Mick might be the face of the band, but the creative dynamic is much more nuanced. This is where their manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, comes in. He shaped their image, guided their career, and in a way, acted as a kind of proto-Scrum Master, if you will.
Hold on, a proto-Scrum Master. That's a wild way to look at it. You're saying even back then, someone needed to facilitate the process, remove obstacles, and help the band reach their full potential.
Exactly. Now compare that to the Beatles and their manager, Brian Epstein. He focused more on the business and organization, while the creative leadership remained with John and Paul. It just goes to show that leadership isn't a one-size-fits-all concept. It needs to adapt to the team and evolve as they do.
So we have these intriguing parallels between managers in these legendary bands and the role of Scrum Masters in Agile today. It makes you wonder if those managers were accidentally practicing Agile principles before Agile even existed.
That's a great point. But before we get too lost in rock and roll history, let's bring it back to you listening right now. What can you take away from all this?
Right, because we're not just here to geek out about music history, though I have to admit, it's pretty fun. The real takeaway is that leadership can take many forms. Sometimes it's about taking charge, sometimes it's about empowering others and removing obstacles. And it's never static. It has to shift with the situation and the team's needs.
That's exactly right. And for any leader, whether they're in music or software development, the key is understanding individual strengths, creating an environment for collaboration to flourish, and being able to adapt your leadership style as the team moves through those tuck-man stages we talked about.
All right, so we've covered productivity, team dynamics, and even a bit of leadership. But there's another key ingredient in the success of these iconic bands: longevity. They didn't just shine brightly. They kept the music going for years, even decades.
Longevity, that's the dream for so many teams, isn't it? To not just perform well, but to keep that momentum going over time. The Rolling Stones are like the ultimate example of weathering storms, evolving, and sticking together for decades. They're practically a rock and roll institution.
But doesn't that kind of clash with the whole agile idea of forming and disbanding teams for each project? Don't you need that constant change to stay fresh and get new perspectives?
That's a great question, and it definitely has its place. But what we often overlook is the power of shared learning. The, unspoken understanding that develops when a team works together for a long time. Think of it like compound interest for teamwork. The longer they stay together, the more efficient and productive they become.
So you're saying all that forming, storming, and norming, while sometimes necessary, also comes at a cost.
Exactly. Every time you bring new people in, there's a ramp-up time, an adjustment period. And even if they're incredibly talented, you lose that accumulated knowledge, that intuitive sense of how the team operates.
It's like starting from scratch with each new song, instead of building on the shared language you've developed as a band.
That's a great analogy. And if we go back to our rock star examples, we see the power of longevity in action. Remember how Keith Richards and Mick Jagger were writing a song a day at their peak? That kind of creative synergy often comes from years of working together, knowing each other's strengths, anticipating each other's moves, like a well-oiled machine, but with a whole lot more soul.
That's incredible. A song a day. I can barely get through my emails in a day. But okay, so for software development, are we saying companies should keep teams together forever, no matter what the project is?
Not necessarily forever, but maybe longer than the typical project cycle. It's all about finding the right balance. You could have a core team that stays together, providing stability and continuity, and then bring in specialists for specific projects or phases as needed. It's recognizing that team longevity has its own value, just like individual expertise does.
I like that. It's almost like shifting our mindset. Instead of seeing teams as temporary groups, we start viewing them as these valuable assets we nurture and develop over time. Kind of like, well, like a band.
Exactly. And maybe we should even start using metrics that reflect this. What if, instead of just focusing on velocity and sprint burndown charts, we also tracked average team duration as a measure of how healthy an organization is?
Whoa. Now that's a radical idea. But I love it. It would definitely force companies to think differently about how they build and manage teams. It's like saying, hey, we value these long-term relationships just as much as we value individual performance.
Right. It's about recognizing that a team that's been together for a while has this incredible potential for efficiency, innovation, and frankly, just plain enjoyment. Like those legendary bands who've been rocking together for decades.
This has been so insightful. We've covered productivity, team dynamics, leadership, and now this fascinating idea of longevity as a key ingredient for success. Is there anything else we can learn from these rock and roll case studies?
Well, there's one more tool we can add to our team-building toolkit, something that could have even helped a band as volatile as the Sex Pistols navigate their internal tensions. Have you ever heard of the DISC model?
DISC. It rings a bell, but I need a refresher.
DISC stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. It's a behavioral assessment tool that helps people understand their own tendencies and preferences as well as those of others. It's all about recognizing different communication styles, decision-making processes, and what motivates people.
So how could this DISC model have helped our rock star teams, especially a band like the Sex Pistols? They were notorious for their conflicts and, well, their short lifespan.
Imagine if the Sex Pistols had used DISC early on. They could have gained insights into their individual styles, understood their clashing personalities, and maybe found ways to communicate and collaborate more effectively.
You're saying DISC could have helped them avoid some of the drama that led to their implosion, like preemptive strike against band breakups.
It's certainly possible. Of course, we can't rewrite history, but the lesson here is clear. Understanding personality types and communication styles is crucial for any team, whether it's a band or a software development squad. It's about creating awareness and empathy so that when conflicts arise, and they inevitably will, you have the tools to navigate them constructively.
It makes you think about all the misunderstandings and frustrations that could be avoided if teams took the time to understand each other better. It's like having a cheat sheet for human interaction, but without the cheating part.
And it's not just about avoiding conflict. It's about leveraging the diversity of those styles. A team with a good mix of DISC profiles can approach problems from different angles, challenge assumptions, and come up with more creative solutions. It's about seeing those differences not as obstacles, but as assets.
So DISC can help us build teams that are not only more harmonious, but also more innovative and effective. It's like a secret weapon for teamwork.
Perhaps not so secret anymore, but the key is to actually apply these insights, to move beyond just understanding the concepts and make them actionable. And that's where the real challenge and the real reward lies.
Okay, so we've covered some serious ground today, from analog era productivity to evolving leadership, the power of long-lasting teams, and even the DISC model as a secret weapon for teamwork. But before we wrap up this rockin' deep dive, let's bring it all back to you. What does it all mean? Why should you care?
That's the question, isn't it? We've been using these iconic bands as a lens to examine teamwork and productivity, but the truth is, these lessons apply way beyond the music industry. Whether you're leading a team, part of a team, or just trying to, tap into your own creative energy, these insights are universal.
So it's not about becoming the next Beatles or Rolling Stones, though I wouldn't mind rocking out at Wembley Stadium. It's about taking the principles that made those bands successful, the collaboration, the adaptability, that relentless drive to improve, and applying them to our own work, our own lives.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that even those legendary bands, with all their talent and success, face the same challenges that any team does. They had conflicts, they wrestled with leadership dynamics, they went through periods of getting stuck and then reinventing themselves. It's a reminder that the journey of teamwork, it's rarely a smooth, straight line.
It's more like a rock and roll song itself, with its highs and lows, unexpected twists and turns, and hopefully a killer finale. But seriously, it's kind of comforting to know that even the greats had to work through these things. It makes our own team struggles feel a bit less, daunting.
Absolutely. And that's one of the biggest takeaways here. By studying how these bands navigated their challenges, both within the band and in that ever-changing music industry, we can learn so much for our own teams, our own organizations.
Okay, let's do a super quick recap. We started by looking at the incredible productivity of bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and how that kind of mirrors the creative process in software development. We explored those Tuckman stages of team development, emphasizing that it's not just about gathering talent, but finding the right blend for what Hepworth called, groupness.
And we challenge the idea of constantly forming and disbanding teams, making a case for longevity as a key ingredient for success, leading to greater efficiency and that almost, telepathic shared understanding.
Oh, and let's not forget the importance of understanding individual styles and how the DISC model can help us build teams that are not just harmonious, but also super effective. It's all about self-awareness, empathy, and seeing the diversity of thought, communication styles as a strength, not a weakness.
Right. It's about recognizing that each person brings something unique to the table, and that by understanding those differences, we can create teams that are truly greater than the sum of their parts.
This has been such an eye-opening exploration, and as we fade out on this rock and roll-inspired deep dive, we want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. If your organization could choose its rock star identity, would it be the enduring Rolling Stones, the innovative Beatles, or maybe even the disruptive Sex Pistols? What would that choice mean for your team dynamics, your culture, and your long-term success? Think about it and rock on.